Welcome to Healing Medicine, formerly the Mindful Healers podcast.
This is the podcast for physicians and healthcare professionals who crave balance and purpose. If you want to rediscover your love for medicine and life, one mindful step at a time, you are in the right place. We are Dr. Jessie Mahoney
And Dr. Nichang Liang, physicians who bring decades of experience in physician health and wellness and leadership to the wellness conversation. Like so many of you, we felt the exhaustion, the disillusionment, and the weight of a career that demands so much, often at the expense of our own well-being.
In this podcast, we explore mindfulness, mindset, and real, sustainable health and well-being strategies.
Not as another task to add to your plate, but as a way to experience medicine and life differently.
Each episode dives into practical strategies, coaching tools, and real conversations to help you feel more present, fulfilled, and in control.
When we are healthy and well, we become powerful agents of change.
If you're ready to break free from exhaustion, cynicism, overwhelm, feeling ineffectual and stuck, and rediscover joy and presence, you are in the right place.
A life and a career that truly fits you await.
Reminder that nothing in this podcast is medical advice. Welcome to today's episode. It's okay to have fun. The evolution of a happy doctor with Dr. Benny Seballos. Our intention today is to explore how sustained ongoing coaching and retreat experiences can support deep transformation across every dimension of your life, and to celebrate Benny's journey, one physician's courageous journey from living a life of self-sacrifice to trusting herself and moving from overwork to joy, play, and healing, even in leadership. So today's episode is going to be an invitation to allow joy and play and fun and to let them take their rightful place in your life. And I'm going to add without guilt, resistance, apology.
I love it already. I'm
So
here for it.
Benny is today's special guest, and she's going to share her story of transformation and shifting into positive energy, creativity, and genuinely happy. So welcome, Benny. I'm so happy to have you.
I'm excited to be here.
And a little bit about our background. So Benny and I have been hanging out together for a while. We first met at one of the very earliest Honoring Diastole retreats, a day retreat. And right after that, you signed up to join me at Sagrada early on in 2022. And then you brought your delightful husband to Honoring Diastole so he could experience it. And then you came back to Sagrada. And then actually you also came here and on our day in Nicasio to try it all out, our soft opening.
Yes.
And if anyone else comes, the salad bowl that you'll eat out of came from Benny, because when we moved, all of our bowls got lost. And so now I have bowls from all kinds of different people, which is awesome.
I love that.
And then since your last retreat, you and I have been doing some one-on-one coaching last year and this year. And
Correct.
I like to think of this sort of ongoing coaching as, I call it preventive care, but not just that, because you're really still growing and evolving.
Right. And I told you I call it the School of Unlearning, which is probably a reference to one of the many books you've recommended for me to read, because there's so much that I learn, but more importantly, so much that I am aware of that I need to unlearn.
Yes.
And continuing to engage in these practices with you, with your community, with others in my community is the only way that I can continue to move in that direction.
And that one of the things that I love about your story is that you, it's not a story of like, I'm not done yet or I'm taking too long. It's just a story of I want to continue to unravel this stuff, and it takes time, and it can happen at this very slow, ongoing pace that's just integrated into your life. That's not a self-improvement project, as we like to say.
Yeah. It's just a journey of discovery. It's like when you start to see things, you kind of have new glasses and you're like seeing things for the first time that you've seen before. It's delightful.
Love it. So a tiny bit about your background, just for our listeners who don't know you. I know you well, but you came from the Philippines and
Mhm.
you trained at UC Davis and UCSF, and now you work at Kaiser Santa Clara in
I
family
Mhm.
medicine.
Mhm.
And your roles, I'm just going to say them because I think they're going to be relevant to all of our conversation. And actually, I will say that many of you have listened to the What's Your Job podcast, or more aptly called Not Your Job podcast.
Okay.
And that came from our conversation about your roles as I'm looking at them.
Oh,
So you
awesome.
you are a family physician, a mom, a wife, a daughter, and a daughter of an aging parent specifically. And
Yes.
you are also, which we're going to draw in today, I'm going to say a creative soul.
I love it.
And
Yes.
you are a salsa dancer, artist, and just like joyful, happy spirit.
Yes. I like all these roles that you've given me. I
Yeah. Well, I had
all
fun
of
with
them.
them.
Those are
Yes, such
definitely in
fun
my
with them.
job column. Yes.
Yeah, you should put those in your job column.
Yes, those are all going to be in my job column. Yeah.
And those, the creative soul part, we're actually going to talk about today, because I think so many people in medicine really struggle with the creativity, or they've lost their creativity, or
Yeah.
they don't know if they have any anymore, but it used to be important. And is it okay? And all of that. So we'll talk about all of that as well.
Sure.
So thank you for joining me. And I would love to hear, just as we start, a little bit about your sort of pre-coaching, who you were before you
Yeah.
started this journey.
Yeah. So as you said, I've had these roles for some time now. So before my first coaching experience, I was obviously already a family doc, mom, daughter, wife. And I remember starting my new job. I had worked at the community health center before coming to Kaiser, but the new job feeling was incredibly overwhelming. For those of you who have worked for large group organizations, there are just a lot of directives. There's a huge volume of work. There's a pace that's different from other places that I had worked to that moment. Before I started coaching, I have I had this moment where I remember hearing someone, probably in management, talking about doing today's work today. And I nearly lost it. I felt that at that moment, there was no way that I was going to be able to do today's work today, because half of today's hours were already accounted for by yesterday's work. So I felt like I was on this treadmill, as being, I was a very kind of capable, smart, hardworking human, but I was set up to fail because the task ahead of me didn't match my skills, the time allotted, and kind of realistic expectations. So that's before coaching. And, before coaching, that's really kind of the mindset that I was living with and I was working with every single day in all the different domains of my life.
Well, and what comes to mind here is, like, they get to say you can do today's work today.
Yes.
And you don't have to be upset about it, nor do you have to do today's work today. Because it might fit into that unrealistic expectation category. But I also worked for an organization, same one, who said you had to do today's work today. And when I learned to let it go, like, they get to say that, and it's not a judgment of me, and
Yeah.
it's not a judgment of anything, really. It's just someone, it is catchy. And so to kind of recognize that I can detach myself from that and still be a good doctor. And
Yeah.
that's really what coaching helps you do.
Yeah, exactly what I was going to say. But until you go to the school of unlearning, you have to remember at that moment, I had spent my whole life kind of aligning my resources towards pretty externally dictated goals, right? Like when you're a pre-med, you work really, really hard so that you can take the MCAT and do well. And then you interview, and there are all these requirements that are given to you, not just your academic requirements, but also, do you have any kind of social activities? Do you have any community service? Do you have any research? So there were
Yeah.
all these things that you were supposed to be able to demonstrate. And then get to medical school and the whole thing repeats itself. You're supposed to be able to basically get a textbook and an exam, and through those two mechanisms pass all of your curricula, and at the same time still find time to kind of figure out what you wanted to do clinically. And so you're working really hard, and then you get into residency, and you're working really, really hard because, patients' lives depend on it. Your team depends on you. This is your living. At some point, you're going to make a career out of this. So those skill sets followed me all the way through to my career. And so, of course, if you tell me this is what you have to do, I take that as gospel truth. And I'm going to go and find a way to make that happen. And I don't
do today's work today.
So I figure out how to do today's work
in primary care.
even if it means that you don't really get to do today's sleep today, because it's not,
Yeah.
it doesn't say do today's self-care today. It doesn't say do today's fun today. It say do today's work today. And that was just a large volume. And I never let that mindset go from all of that training. And gentle demands on my time, my energy, my talents. And so you can see that little treadmill of a life was driving me to exhaustion. Although I have to say, for people who don't know me, and maybe even for people to know me, it was not an act. I was a completely, what I would have thought, a pretty cheerful, engaged, energetic human. I think people who met me would have said, wow, she's really social, she's really happy. And it wasn't an act. I really was, but I was exhausted. And that's a big, big difference.
And you weren't having fun.
No, there was no, I mean, I was probably having a lot of activities, but I think the activities were still probably pretty externally driven by, like, making sure that my daughter was engaged, spending time with family, because that's really important to me. Making sure that I was exercising because you're supposed to do that. Self-care.
That was probably checklist. And that actually is a perfect pivot to this happiness. Tell me about your experience with the word happiness.
Oh gosh. So first, we're going back to the first retreat. For those who have attended any of Jessie's retreats, she does this activity, or not even a retreat, but any of your coaching sessions. You get a bowl, and the bowl has words, and you pick the word out, and it's supposed to kind of trigger reflection and maybe guide the experience for the duration. And the first word I picked was happiness. And I remember being like not like I'm offended. That's how I was so offended that this word had found me, because there was nothing to indicate that I was an unhappy human. In fact, like I said, people would probably describe me as being really cheerful, really productive, and really happy. But I remembered looking at that word and being like, what wait a minute, what does this word actually mean? What does it what does it mean to be happy? And I think that is why I continue to coach, is because it's been a journey of trying to understand what that meant for myself at my core, and not being accomplished, and not being productive, and not being what other people enjoy to be around and expect me to be. So yeah, I remember that word.
So interesting. So tell us a little bit, because you've been on several retreats, like what got you to come to the first ones, and what did you learn there?
Yeah. The very first one was the honoring diastole one. And I remember going to that one because it was pandemic life. Like, I'm pretty sure it was 2020. That I was listening, or must have been out, because we were able to be out, we were able to gather. But I was attending one of very many kind of teams based, what I felt were like self-improvement projects, because they were talking about self-care or physician wellness, or something that I was desperately trying to like figure out in a very intellectual way. I'm like, okay, I need to listen to TED Talks about this. I need to listen to people who are talking about this. I had attended an AAFP like wellness CME thing. So it was in that space and in that realm. And so I heard that they were doing the honoring diastole retreat, and I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that I needed to find a way different from how I had been doing things. And so that was the first one that I attended. And that was the first time that I got introduced to how you break down all the different kind of thought habits that are unique, or at least I felt were really unique and resonating for female physicians in particular, around like, this concept of being overly responsible. I would not have recognized the word perfectionism before that, because I've always been like, well, I'm not a perfectionist. Perfectionist is for those other unhappy people who are driving themselves to be perfect. But there were other words that you used that I was just like, it just kept hitting. I'm like, that, yeah, I do that. I do that. I do that. And also this feeling of like, but wait, like, isn't that what I'm supposed to be doing? If I'm not doing that,
Mm.
not only will bad things happen and the sky will fall, but if I'm not doing that, then what am I supposed to be doing? And so that was what that first retreat was like for me.
And so what was it that got you to come back to the second, third and fourth ones?
Right. I mean, I think definitely I stand by that feeling that there's a school of unlearning. Like, I really did feel like if I decide that how I was doing things before was no longer serving me as well, then what is the new way? And it takes the same way that it took me decades to get to being a very capable, very happy physician. There had to be other skills that I needed to learn. And also, there was a lot of joy in discovering this journey with other people. So I brought my husband. Um, I've met friends. I've just, even if they're not people that I see all the time, the stories we've shared continue to resonate with me and inform how I might approach a new situation, or how I might reflect on something that has happened in the past or continues to happen. So there's a lot of learning to be done.
I'm as you were talking about your journey, I was thinking, wow, this is like coaching is almost like going to college again.
Yes.
Right? It's like it's about the same course before
Yeah.
you're like, okay, I got this. It changes you actually in a very similar way to you send your kid off to college and 4 years later they're a very different person.
Yeah.
To me, that's actually a lot of what coaching feels like. I know you've asked me many times, like, well, where does it end? Or
Yes.
I know. And I'm thinking, kind of like, when you hit the end of college, you're like, yeah, I got this. Like, I'm ready for something new.
I think sometimes they just kick you out too, though. They're like, at some
Sometimes.
point you got to go. I think,
Well,
yeah. No.
and it's interesting because I do think that for each of us, maybe they kick you out, but you go on to study something different,
Sure.
right? You
I
go
don't,
on to learn
yeah.
something else. And you've often asked me about my own coaching. And, until recently, I had been doing it regularly. And right now I'm doing what I would call a different kind of coaching, more of a, rather than mindset coaching, more of like physical coaching, because that's
Uh-huh.
what I need. Although for me, there's actually a ton of mindset work in there,
Yeah.
because I have a lot of old physical trauma. But so interesting, right? To think about that I do believe it's like, well, then you go off to, physical therapy school, and then you go off to, you become a specialist and you do a fellowship or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, I think part of why I teased about like getting kicked out is not so much that, but I feel like as I mean, maybe just this is just me, but like I'm a lifelong learner. I really am. Like, I have
It
a
is not just
nerdy,
you.
yeah,
Every physician is a
every
lifelong.
physician is a lifelong learner, and there's a nerdiness to like coaching that really resonates for me, because it's like you really are like, there's a systematic way of looking at something, and it's not really just about like looking back. Is I don't really, I mean, I couldn't tell you that I have past trauma. I mean, like, I probably do, but it's not
Everybody
a
does.
big piece of
Everybody
how
does.
I look at my mind work. It's really about like, okay, habits and thoughts and concepts, and like little boxes of like, oh, this is how you progress through any kind of a new experience, a new journey. So that's what I
Almost like
really like.
learning a new language, or
Yeah,
even medicine is like a way of approaching the world.
for sure.
This is, many people talk about it as like life education,
Yeah,
which they never gave us in any of those other education places we
sure.
were attending.
Sure.
And so I'm curious, we're going to talk about coaching in a minute, but what is different about retreats, like in your experience? Because you've done both.
I think that the other people, the energy of other people, and I think there was some like some a quote about like, it's like we're all, I feel like we all have the same stories, but maybe just different languages maybe
Mhm.
different characters. And in the same way that when you find your folk when you're going through the same college or med school experience, I think when you go through a retreat, you're seeing all these other people who have come from such different places geographically, professionally, personally, and yet we all have the same need to learn this new way. We all have this same lens of like trying to figure it out. And I think that's such a rich place to be, because I think physicians don't like when they're like, we don't like to admit that we don't have it figured out. I think we all want to feel like even going to be coached feels
Mhm.
so like, oh wait, maybe because I don't know what I'm doing and I'm not doing it right. And that's very triggering. It puts you in this really vulnerable space. I don't think an athlete would say I don't need to be coached, right? I
Right.
don't think a pianist would say I don't need a teacher, but I think physicians are always striving to be the expert,
Right.
that you don't want to be in the position of admitting that you need to learn from other people.
So interesting though, because actually we do. And if you
Yeah,
think about like,
CMEs, right?
well, CMEs, but also being like primary care, like we're actually not the experts in everything. And
Yeah,
one of the
true.
things that I think makes the best physician is to know what you don't know and to get help.
Yeah. I think
Um,
yeah. I think
and-
coaching shows you all those different contradictions. I mean, in some ways this feels like coaching, right? Where
yeah,
I'll say something that I feel like I've come to and believe to be true, and you're like, "Well, actually, let's think about that. Let's put that back on the examining table and really sort that out." So yeah.
it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, any other like the tools that have come up in coaching that you like, or what is it that sort of keeps you going on this journey?
Yeah. I mean, it's different tools. I think one of the big tools you alluded to is this concept of having a definition about like a distinction between what's my job and what's not my job. I
Mm-hmm.
think that was one of the most important exercises we went through,
Mm-hmm.
because before that moment, I felt like it was all my job, right? Like I've had some small leadership roles where I work, and I felt like everything from receiving information, transmitting it, defending the policy, making sure it happened, making sure everyone was rowing in the same direction and happy while they were doing it, that all felt like my job. Like I was responsible for every single experience that every single person that I interacted with had when it came to rolling out a workflow or even just making their way through the day in clinic. And I think recognizing the distinction between things that were and were not my job was super helpful. The other thing that we talked a little bit about in one of the coaching sessions was this concept of fun. And
Mm-hmm.
that really, really kind of triggered a pivot for me in a big way. Um, I think, one shift was direct, like aiming towards being happier and less exhausted. But then this next leap up was this concept of actually having fun. And fun for me is very different from being happy. Fun for me is a big, like initially just felt like this big, selfish,
Mm.
indulgent, maybe even like inappropriate phenomenon, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you're not supposed to have fun. Fun is for when there's kids, kids have fun, or like when you're 20s you go out and you have fun. Like I just felt like fun was something that I had not connected to in a
Mm-hmm.
while.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was happiness, there was contentment, there was accomplishment, but maybe not fun. And so
Mm.
we spent a bit of time talking about fun, and that cascaded a lot of other developments and changes for me internally and externally. And that was really good. That was really fun.
And I think this idea that creativity and fun are valid ways to spend time. You mentioned to me that
Yes.
your mom would say, like, well, that's not making money, so why are
Right.
you doing it?
Right, right. And so to creativity, I remember, here's one important thing that I remember learning about creativity. I started salsa dancing when I was in medical school, and I was in a tough spot then because again, I came as an adult learner, meaning that I already had a career before I went to medical school, so I was already really good at something. So suddenly here you are in medical school with people who are younger and like sounded just much smarter, who probably had a degree in biochemistry when I had one class in biochemistry when I was patching together my pre-med requirements. And so I don't know why, but I started also taking salsa lessons, and it saved my life, meaning that going from feeling really inadequate, I could then pivot to saying, you know what? I remember saying this to myself in rounds, like, I'm a better salsa dancer than most doctors I know, and I'm a better doctor than most salsa dancers I know. And I think that really allowed me to tap into the fact that there's more than one way to be good at something. There's all these different brains and strivings out in the world. And it is so important not to forget that. And then the same thing about reconnecting with fun is this whole other ways to be in the world where you're not, quote unquote, just a professional. You're not just a doctor. You're not just a mom. But you're a human, and you go through this life not because you have a job to do, but because you have a life to live. And fun is it's what allowed me to really clarify, what does it mean to me to have fun? Like, what are my values? What are the kinds of things I enjoy doing? And like you said, with my mom, having, she's an immigrant, she raised 4 kids, she worked multiple jobs, she's very frugal. And that, plus living in a capitalist economy, makes it really feel like your time should be spent like earning, being productive. And fun is not on the list of things that you should even be considering. And so it's been so good to be able to reconnect with that, because it not only makes my day lighter and makes my life happier, but I think it realigns how I live, not just for my own self. When I go dancing, or I make these little cards that I trade with other people, like, but also kind of informing my family and my life and my workplace that, hey guys, there's so many other things that are important, that the important parts of our brain, important people that we need to connect with on these different levels. And that's been very liberating.
And you have mentioned, we often talk about the things that energize you or deplete you, and
Yes.
fun energizes you. And
For
so it is worthwhile or
Yes.
productive for those people who need that lens, but I
Yeah.
think it's very true.
Yeah.
Do you want to share a little bit too about how fun can combat loneliness? I really, that conversation with you was really powerful.
Yeah. So I feel like, I think that there's a context. So can I talk about the artist trading cards now?
Yes.
So I will go back to salsa because that was my first creative endeavor, and definitely salsa uh, was a fantastic way to connect with all sorts of different people. And I feel like a lot of the time that connection is what kept the team going. I got involved with the salsa team. Um, in the end, that ventured wasn't a perfect match because schedules and young people who don't have families, they want to practice all the time, they travel all the time, they're out dancing all the time, ultimately was not a good match for what I was doing. And the nice thing about fun is when you connect with what's fun, you can also learn when things stop being fun, which I think is a really important lesson. So when I kind of was looking for other ways to be creative and to have fun, knowing that being connected with other people was just a really important part of that adventure for me as well. Like, I pivoted to doing these little artist trading cards, and what they are small cards, 2.5 by 3.5, and you do any work that you do with it. Hold on for a second. Eric's picking her up. Sorry. So they're little cards that you trade with other people. And number one, it's super fun and it's very creative, but it also kind of fosters this connection with other people, because I'm not making art to sell it. As my mom said, why do you spend so much time on these cards? You're not making any money.
Mhm.
I'm not really using it to display it. I'm not doing it to become a more proficient artist, but I'm doing it because of the connection that I can make with other people. And
Mhm.
it's been crazy. Like, one of the cards that I remember trading for was cute because it says, artists are the most dangerous. They interact with people from all walks of life and should be, you beware of artists, basically.
Mhm. Mhm.
But because of this little hobby that I have, I've connected with little old ladies all over the country, many of whom this serves as their primary network. Like, sometimes I'll text people when I'm arranging a trade, and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it's like 2 in the morning for you. And they're like, oh, no, that's okay. No, please don't. I don't mind. My kids are out. I live home. I'm home alone. I make these cards and I trade them with people, and they'll trade with for anything. Like, some of these are really talented artists and they don't care what I trade them for because they're just looking for that connection. And so I'll chat with them online and learn about them, and, like, not surprisingly, a lot of folks will yeah, and it's just I'm learning so much from them about how their life is, and I think they get so much out of that connection. And it really is, I wouldn't have imagined that I could do that.
It's reminding me of the conversation before we started recording about this idea of you just have no idea the potential impact of something when you just lean into it.
Yeah,
And like when we have fun, we lean into it. We're
yeah,
not like curating and having control and
yeah.
thinking like this. You're just in it. And
Right.
that is what I see with so many people and with myself, that when you
Yes.
just trust it and you go with it and you lean into it and you have fun with it,
Yes.
amazing things can happen. I was actually working with someone on they're wanting to shift and start a business, and my advice is like just have fun with it. Like you never know what will happen there. We want to do all the check boxes, and even if it's a terrifying transition, if you bring fun into it, you'll have
Yep.
that connection, you'll have energy, you won't
Yep.
be lonely, you won't be as isolated, and you never know what the impact of that could be.
Yeah, you never know. And I think the other thing that's nice about it too is not just the fact that, like, for that person that you coach to say that you should learn to have fun, it increases your energy level, it increases your productivity, it makes you more creative. The other thing that I noticed is that there's a ripple effect for the people around me, right? Like, my mom will now set aside little
Mhm.
tags from jam jars, or, like, I'll see some stuff that, normally would be in the junk mail pile and it's on my desk. And I'm like, well, what is that for? And she's encouraging me to have fun. And I think because of it, I think it allows her also to think of things in a different way. And when you live with people and they see how much you value it, and when you work with people and they see that that's an agenda item, not necessarily a formal agenda item, but to bring that spirit of, like, hey, the things we do should incorporate this element of fun, celebration, joyfulness, connection. I think that's I think it's contagious.
Yeah. Well, and as you said, we have a life to live,
Yes.
not just things to do, but a
Yes.
life to live.
Correct. Not just a job to do. Not just,
And
yeah.
what you described there is when you give yourself permission to have fun, you give other people permission to have fun.
Yes.
And
Yes.
they may need you as a conduit, right?
Sure.
Because it's really hard when we first start trying to have fun. We
Right.
don't know how to have fun.
Right.
We
No,
don't know
it's
what's fun because we've
yep.
turned it off for so long,
Correct.
especially women in medicine who maybe, we've been working, working, working.
Yep.
We've been taking care of other people and children and family members, and like fun has not been front and center for a long time.
Sure. Sure, sure, sure. Like, yeah, you can be playful, you can play with your kids, you can play, and but, like, again, fun, having something that's internally driven and almost like this, I keep thinking of those, like, perpetual motion machines. It just
Yeah.
keeps, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So before we close this out, I wanted to ask you a bit about coaching and leadership, because when
mm,
you first came to that first retreat, you had a brand new leadership role.
yes, I did.
And now we're, I don't know, 3+ years later.
Yes.
And how did the coaching help you navigate that in a more easeful, maybe even fun way, but at least a more
Yeah. Well, both. Like I think, like I mentioned earlier, one of the big jobs, one of the big coaching sessions we had that really, really helped was this "not my job, what's my job" piece of it. Because I think, again, because you come to this role having been rewarded the whole time for being hardworking, smart, team playing, and probably over responsible, like those are the same skills that I bring to this new position. But those are also the same skills that have led to so many people I know, myself included, kind of tiptoeing to that edge of being just completely exhausted because there's a tremendous mismatch between time in a day and the job that needs to be done for that day. And so that's one big piece that was really helpful, was to take a step back and go to the school of unlearning and coaching and saying, no, there's a different way to do it where you can still be successful. People will not die if you don't do today all of today's work today, which is I think what's always hanging over your head. And then I think you need, like, people I personally needed to borrow permission. You know how you always tell people you lend them your confidence?
Yep.
I needed permission to trust that a different way of doing things would still work. That if I didn't take it all on, it would still be okay. To share responsibility with other people is probably at the end a really, really healthy thing for all parties involved because it allows people to step up into the spaces that they want to take on. Um, and then, of course, this notion of making sure that things are fun for me was a very playful way to continue to do the work. But I will also say that it has been an invaluable lens when I've learned how to sunset different things, right? Like if something isn't fun anymore, not just because I think we should be like that, not that every piece of everything we do is fun, but if fundamentally it's no longer energizing you, it's no longer helping you tap into those spaces that are creative, then maybe that task, that role, that piece of what you're doing is no longer what you need to be doing. And that's helpful.
Yeah. And that could be a whole leadership role or roles within the leadership role.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Because
Because
sometimes you have to ditch the role. You just have to parcel out the pieces that
exactly.
give you energy.
Correct. And that's helpful because then you can look at it and say, as opposed to like, what's my job? What's not my job? You could even say what's fun and what's not fun anymore, right? About
Yeah.
these different pieces. So yeah.
Well, and this idea, you don't have to suffer and struggle. You can
Yes,
actually, what might not be fun for you, or maybe what used to be fun, it could be fun for someone else.
for sure. For sure. And to not, yeah. And to be able to share that. And then it opens up your energy and your space to take on something different because it's it's a long, long day, long gig,
Yeah.
this whole life
And so
thing.
what tools, coaching tools, besides the not your job, is the one that's kind of helped you, I might even say, be able to continue to be a leader?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in the grand rubric of self care, I think so it redefines what self care means. Self care includes reflection, self care includes doing less, doing different. And I think unless I had been coached, I wouldn't have trusted that those were principles that I could live and work by.
I love that. I call that leading with a lens to wellness, which
Mm,
means that it's not just looking at everyone else's wellness. Like you can't lead with a lens to wellness if you're not well yourself. And
mhm.
when we model permission as a leader to take care of ourselves and to be thoughtful and reflective and intentional rather than reactive, that
Mhm.
gives other people permission to do the same. And
Yeah.
therefore the leading is actually easier, right?
For sure. And I think like I have had very, very many friends who are overly responsible. Like I can still be like I am, like we all are, like that can have a little bit of ease when you can share with them that, it's okay. And I needed coaching to do that for me for a long time to say, it's okay. Like this new way is gonna work out.
I love it.
Yeah.
So what do you want other people, physicians, women physicians in particular, to know from your journey or?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is feeling like it's possible to do things differently.
Mhm, mhm. Love it. Okay, beautiful. Yeah. And what happens when you do things differently?
You have a different outcome.
Yeah,
And things
exactly.
become, yeah, you have a different outcome. And I'm still the same person, right? I didn't change. I didn't stop being smart and productive and friendly and all those things.
And the
But
world doesn't blow up or fall
there,
down.
yeah, people
Well,
didn't
it
die.
might, but not because you changed.
No, I didn't do it.
Yeah.
There's a whole, yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah,
Yes.
but it's also like, yeah, then there's a lightness to things because
Mm-hmm.
so much of what you carry is not really productive. Like you sit there and you worry and you burden yourself with things that at the end of the day, number one, are not your job. And then number two, they're not in your control. And so if you can let some of those things go, then like allows you to spend your time and your energy doing other things that are more fun, that are in your control, that do actually make a difference.
I love it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to end with some reflection questions just because I think that our listeners, I always find it helpful to think about for you,
Mm-hmm.
what brings you joy or fun just for
Mm-hmm.
you, and what in your life might shift if you made joy or fun or happiness a valid priority.
Yes.
And then what are you holding on to or still doing that, we often say no longer serves, but I'm going to change that here to what's no longer fun.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, life isn't supposed to be all fun, but it's also supposed to not be all serving. And in fact, having fun can serve other people in many ways. In fact, I think that's probably what serves people the most.
Yeah.
And then, like what could happen if you start honoring your own needs and
Mm-hmm.
taking care of yourself and creating space for whatever it is, change, joy, creativity, all the things.
Yes. I like all those questions.
Any final words you want to share?
No, I think though you summed it up super, super well. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of the journey that we've had together. It's been fun.
Yes.
It continues to be.
Yes.
And thank you for letting me make sure that, fun is my compass now. Like
Yeah.
it's not my only compass, but it's one
Yeah.
of the directions on my compass. And I really, really
Does
appreciate
that sound just crazy to the
it.
Benny in 2022?
Oh,
Yeah.
beyond. Like I just, yeah. Yeah. I mean, happiness was crazy enough. I mean, fun is just a whole
Well,
nother.
and I just want to add, because you guys don't know the former Benny, but the former Benny was actually sunny
Yeah,
and happy and light
right,
and laughing and
right.
positive.
Totally.
And so the fact that, you start that way and you can become this, there's
Yeah.
room for all of us to
For
change. I think many people say to me, "Oh, you're so calm." I'm like, there's still room for me to be more calm,
sure.
not from a deficit, but
Right.
just from a
Yeah.
doing more of the things that feel authentic to you.
100%. And like I said, like I don't, that's the nice thing about, I mean, coaching I came to because I was tired for sure. And because I really did want to learn, nerd me, a
Yeah.
different way of being. But it's not because was coming from this place of deep need and discouragement. And I didn't think that I was broken. Like
Yeah.
there was
Yeah.
nothing wrong with
And
me.
that's something that we haven't touched on actually, is that I find that many people who come to coaching, not because they're broken or
Yeah,
desperate or the world is ending,
sure.
they can't go on. A lot of people come in that state, but you
Yes.
can get a ton of benefit when you're not in that state, but you just know there's a different way, or you want
Yeah.
things to be different, or you have that just like nagging, I think this could be
Yeah.
better
Yeah.
way. And that's a
Yeah.
really powerful place to start your coaching, and you can make, tremendous change that really helps you live your life rather than just
Mhm.
endure it or
Yeah.
struggle through it.
Like a power up. You just
Yeah.
need, you just need that energy. You need to get energized. I think I would be surprised if all of your uh, attendees did not say that they came away from a retreat energized in whatever dimension that feels.
Energized, inspired,
Yeah.
lighter.
Yes, all of those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well,
So.
I want to thank you for coming and sharing your story and fun and happiness and the possibility that, you really can live a life like that and still be a productive doctor who's still working in primary care. You haven't cut
Love.
back your hours. You haven't
Nope.
changed anything.
Nope.
You're
Still
just enjoying what you do.
totally. Very much so. Thank
So
you.
thank you so much for coming on. And for everyone listening, thank you all so much for listening. And we will see you next week.
Thank you for joining us. Be sure to stay on after the sound of the singing bowl for our mindful moment offering to practice.
Please check the show notes for additional resources and insights, and please explore our other episodes.
If our message resonates, we'd love to connect further. Please share this podcast with colleagues, friends, and family members. And remember, when you work with us, you don't just consume information, you create real change.
We offer coaching, mindfulness experiences, workshops, retreats, and talks. Visit healingmedicinepodcast.com to learn more.
Please note the content of this podcast is not medical or life advice. Always participate in our mindful moments safely.